There are 7 things people do in toxic workplaces to try to cope, but instead of improving the toxic work environment, they make the toxicity so much worse. If you want to survive your toxic job as unscathed as possible, you need to stop doing these 7 things. The first one is a mistake literally 99% of my clients make. In a toxic work environment, it's a normal thing that would have the expected result. But in a toxic workplace, it's a knee-jerk reaction that is an express path to crashing yourself out. Stop trying to prove yourself. If you are in a toxic work environment, your work and abilities are constantly questioned. You are also probably dealing with unrealistic expectations, unmanageable workloads, and constant criticism. It is exhausting. You know that you're smart, talented, and capable. You have a history of high performance across your career and your life. So you do what you've always done when you've encountered doubt. You try to prove yourself. You overachieve. You go above and beyond, exceeding every expectation that they can put in front of you, which they retroactively change on the regular. You take on extra work. You help your coworkers, volunteer for extra tasks. You do everything you can to demonstrate your value, even when your toxic manager is being completely unreasonable. Like when they make a last-minute request at 10 p.m., you are on it. But here's the thing. It does not matter how highly you perform, the impact that you make, or how much you help their bottom line. You will never be good enough in a toxic workplace. Chasing approval from a toxic boss or a toxic coworker is like trying to hold water in a cupped hand. No matter how hard you try, the water is going to leak out. And the more you try to contain it, the more comes out. Despite all your effort, you are left drained with nothing to show for it. One of 2 things are going to happen when you're in this toxic work situation. You will continue overachieving, overworking, and overwhelming yourself and continue to be met with the same toxic BS you're already dealing with. Or you reconcile that the toxic person at work will never accept, approve, or maybe even like you, and that has nothing to do with you. All you can do is change how you react in the situation. Instead of spinning your wheels and spiraling, you can do your job, meet expectations, and detach. Of course, this is so much easier said than done, but my clients have a secret tool that they use that helps them stop giving an F about what toxic people at work think about them. And more importantly, to cultivate inner confidence and self-approval that is so important to survive in a toxic work environment. They use my Get Over Your Toxic Job guidebook. Even if you're still in it, you can start unpacking what you're dealing with in your toxic job and deactivate toxic job triggers that will make your life miserable. Best of all, it's on sale right now. You can get it today at toxicworkplacerecovery.com. The second thing you need to stop doing in a toxic workplace is both the simplest and the most liberating. Over the last few years, I have heard from tens of thousands of people who have been in a toxic workplace, and there is one phrase that I hear more often than almost any other. And I think it reflects the most deceptive and discombobulating aspects of experiencing workplace toxicity.
It's not fair.
There are countless unfair things that happen in a toxic workplace. Your toxic boss berates you in front of your colleagues for a mistake that they made. You get passed over for promotion, and your incompetent coworker who spends all their day sucking up to the boss gets it instead. Your toxic coworker spreads malicious gossip about you and turns most of your team against you. The list goes on and on and on and on. In fact, feel free to vent about something unfair that you experienced in the comments. I bet there are going to be hundreds of unique stories. You're not wrong to expect to be treated fairly at work. Fairness is a concept that toddlers can comprehend. It's something that you were raised to expect, and you're expected to treat people fairly. But in a toxic workplace, the fairness principle is obsolete. I have heard thousands of toxic workplace stories. In these stories, there have been hundreds of behaviors and dynamics that have created the toxicity in the workplace. No 2 toxic job stories have been the same, but they all have this one thing in common. Toxic workplaces are unfair. In a toxic work environment, you will not be treated fairly. Instead of fairness, you will find favoritism, uneven bars of expectations, and inconsistency. One thing that comes up for a lot of my clients is they exceed their performance metrics, but get downrated on their performance evaluations, which hurts their pay, or their boss attributes their work to their favorite or to themselves. Not only is dealing with this unfairness frustrating, it is exhausting. This is why you need to stop expecting fairness in a toxic workplace. If you're like me and you're not neurotypical and your justice orientation is set to max, this is a lot easier said than done, because fairness and justice are the same thing. Now, we can go off in the comments for days arguing that work should be be fair, which is a statement we all actually agree on. But it is crucial to reconcile the simple fact that in a toxic workplace, unfairness is a choice, not an accident. If you point it out, no one's going to do anything about it. Instead, they're going to turn it around and make you the problem. Which brings us to the third thing that you must stop doing in a toxic work environment. In my opinion, this is the most damaging because it takes the biggest toll on you even after you leave the toxic workplace. This is something I've discussed in other videos, as it's a manipulation used to keep you in a toxic work environment. Your toxic boss has convinced you that you are the problem. When you have raised concerns about work or even about a toxic work dynamic, your concerns weren't heard. Instead, they were hurled back at you. You've been blamed for your boss's mistakes, your coworkers' failures, and really anything can be your fault. At some point, you even started blaming yourself for those mistakes. When you're in a toxic workplace, you need to stop taking the blame. It is not yours to take. This advice completely changed the game for my client. We'll call her Catherine. Catherine was in the middle of a very toxic workplace. She was surrounded by all the quintessential corporate villains and energetic vampires. There were 3 people in particular that had that toxic mix of incompetence and inability to own their mistakes, even when the mistakes were mundane and didn't matter. So you can imagine how they would act when it did matter. Catherine was self-aware and had a habit of quickly taking accountability for her role when things went sideways and when they went well. This trait served her in her career until she was in a toxic work environment. And, well, if you've been there, you already know where this is going. Catherine was working with a group of coworkers on a highly visible, highly important project. Catherine's role was actually quite small, and she had executed it perfectly. But since some of these coworkers were incompetent, of course it went off the rails, failed spectacularly, and the failure was escalated all the way up the corporate ladder. Heads were going to roll. In a postmortem, Catherine did what she had always done. She demonstrated leadership by offering a way she could improve in the future. The second she took that tiny shred of accountability, she became the sacrificial lamb and was blamed for everything, even the things she had nothing to do with. When you are willing to hold the bag, everyone's going to throw theirs at you. Now, I want to be clear. This does not mean that you should not be accountable. You're only hurting yourself if you're not. However, as I explained to Catherine, you can hold yourself accountable internally without saying a word to anyone else. On a deeper level, many of my clients have internalized the toxicity that they were being steeped in. They've blamed themselves for the situation escalating, for staying too long in the toxic workplace, and for not being able to fix it, which is the fourth thing that you need to stop doing in a toxic workplace. Stop solving problems that are not yours. I have spoken to way too many people who have tried to fix the toxic work environment. Like we discussed earlier in the video, they thought if they proved themselves, their boss would treat them fairly and with respect. They've overcompensated with kindness to try to improve the work environment. And especially when I work with leaders in a toxic work environment, they've sacrificed themselves as umbrellas to shield their teams from the greater toxic work environment. But you cannot fix a toxic work environment. Workplace toxicity starts and ends at the top. Unless you're at the very top there, you can't change it. So many of my clients have ended up taking on leadership tasks and a ton of emotional labor to support their coworkers when they have a toxic boss. In their efforts to fix it, they end up enabling their toxic manager. The needs their toxic manager refuses to meet are being met, so it's not a problem. I often see this when a toxic work environment is due to a toxic coworker. Most managers have no idea how to manage difficult people. So when you have a coworker who's a bully or is malicious, they lack the ability to deal with them. Instead, they manage who they can, the unproblematic employees. You won't be a problem, you'll keep the peace. In cases like this, not only should you not solve the problem, you need to become the bigger problem, which if you want a video to deep dive on how to do that the right way, please let me know, because most people get it seriously wrong, and getting it wrong can get you fired. Of course, this isn't to say that you stoop to your toxic coworker's level, which actually brings me to the fifth thing that you need to stop doing in a toxic workplace. Unfortunately, it's the reflex I hear about most often in my YouTube comments. This is the antidote and the escape button to workplace toxicity. When you're dealing with a difficult coworker or a toxic boss, you instinctively react. Let's use a very common example, office gossip. And actually, let's have a toxic job quiz. Your coworker who has too much time and not enough hobbies has decided to make you the star of their latest rumor, with at least a little splash of exaggeration if they aren't making the whole thing up. How do you respond? A, shut down the rumor. B, stress out and or complain. C, plot revenge on them. Or D, all of the above. Maybe you didn't act out on C, but if you've been the target of malicious gossip at work or office rumors, you probably spent an amount of time that we will not judge daydreaming about it. Dealing with dirty office politics like that is enraging, annoying, and almost impossible. But here's the thing. When you react, you do not win. When you react to office gossip or any toxic office politics, you're playing a rigged game and you will lose, which is why you need to avoid the wrong office politics. Keyword: wrong. Because the only way that you can actually avoid toxic office politics is to engage in office politics. This is really crucial, so I'm going to come back to it in a minute. But first, we need to talk about what happens when you are sucked into the toxic politics at work. You burn out. In fact, everything about a toxic work environment burns you out. The hours, the demands, the cognitive load of constantly being on edge. When you're in a toxic workplace, you are never safe. Even on good days, things can turn quickly. You're dealing with unreal expectations, 24/7 demands, and that whole trying to prove yourself thing. So you put yourself on the back burner. But if you're in a toxic work environment, you need to stop neglecting yourself. On the surface level, your toxic job has taken over your life. For starters, there are no work-life boundaries when you have a toxic job. One toxic manager I worked with demanded 24/7 availability from all staff. If you called at 12 a.m. on a Friday night with some imagined emergency, and literally nothing we did was ever actually urgent, and you didn't answer, you were getting in trouble. When the team fell behind, he mandated overtime, which of course is exempt to employees. We did not get paid for. First it was 10 hours a day, then 12, then working weekends too. If I refused to work, I knew I would be fired instantly. This took away from other areas of my life, of course. The first thing to go was my social life. I struggled to make plans around my work hours, frequently had to cancel, and when I did go out at any point, I would get sucked into yet another emergency email exchange. Of course, I was neglecting myself to a ridiculous level as well. I didn't have time to go to the gym, I was sleep deprived, and I was living off fast food and takeaways. I was exhausted, frustrated, and deeply unhappy. And this was early in my career, so I had no idea how to push back. Luckily, I did realize how much this job was costing me before it was too late. The demands made it impossible to find another job, so I saved everything that I could to give myself the ability to quit with a buffer to find another job. Maybe your job hasn't taken over your life to the extreme that mine did, but there is a way that it is, and this is true for everyone I have ever spoken to in a toxic work environment. Your toxic job is cognitively consuming you. You think about it all the time. You talk about it all the time, mostly trying to process what's happening and to get validation that you're not the problem. You're constantly stressing about it. You can't sleep at night because you're replaying things that happened in your head, trying to make sense of it all. The worst part is, your needs have been completely neglected without you even realizing it. If you're in a toxic work environment, you need to stop neglecting yourself. The most important person in your life is you. It doesn't matter if you're a partner, a parent, a caretaker, a friend. You cannot show up for anyone else the way that you want to when you are running on empty. The thing is, you're probably telling yourself this one lie, and this one lie is necessary to keep you in a toxic work environment. Actually, most toxic workplaces affirm this lie every so often. The entire toxic workplace cycle depends on you believing it. And if you didn't believe it, you would have quit already. Not only do I speak to people here every day that are in toxic work environments, I regularly hear from friends, family, and former coworkers who are going through it. And every one of them has said the same thing. Held the same hope, really. So let me know in the comments if you've said this to yourself too. Maybe it'll get better. On a particularly awful day, you expect the next day to not be so bad. Your toxic boss is probably extra nice after that eruption that they just had. Toxic leaders know that you will not tolerate a toxic work environment. No one willingly does.
My dream job is toxic AF,
said no one ever. The vast majority of my clients have not been in toxic work environments that are always and consistently toxic. Most of them have glimmers of hope. They see the potential of the company, and they see the potential that they would have there if what they were promised was delivered. But things always regress to the mean. If you're in a toxic workplace, you need to stop waiting for it to get better. Could it happen? Sure. But the vast majority do not change. This isn't to say that you walk in and quit tomorrow. Let's be real. The crucial reason you stay in that toxic job is money. We need the paycheck. But while you're there, you need to stop waiting for it to get better and start doing the inner work to unpack the toxic job bags that you've acquired and to start gaining immunity from the toxic work environment. Most people think that this is impossible. And I admit it's not easy, but I've helped thousands of people do just that. In fact, go watch this video where I'm going to share the exact process process on how you can detach from a toxic job even when you're still in it. I'll see you there, bestie.